In 1942, harvests were declared the best on record.
From the very beginning of the war, one of Germany's principal aims has been Britain's starvation. Yet today, Britain can claim to be the best-fed country in Europe, and her 1942 harvest looks like being the greatest on record. The country has responded magnificently to the government's agricultural policy, and there are now 6 million more acres under crops than before the war. 6 million. Grain crops are the heaviest ever harvested. For instance, about half the wheat we require, we now grow ourselves. Labour for the harvest has included help from many amateurs, not least a large number of schoolboys who have thoroughly enjoyed the service.
Farmers needed extra help to bring in the bumper crops. Volunteers were sought. And as with many other jobs during the war, it was women who stepped forward. Thousands helping by joining the Women's Land Army.
In which case you would be directed to the countryside, where you would either work on a farm and take the place of male labourers, work with the farmer, or you would join what they call the timber corps, felling and chopping up trees, which is very, very heavy work, you know. And I think people think about the land army as just women on farms, but there were a lot of women in the timber corps as well, which I've sort of forgotten about.
For young women during the war, escaping to a farm in the country seemed appealing and was a chance to do one's bit. The Women's Land Army was also open to younger women than the other services, from 17 and a half.
Girls, as we know, are playing their part on the land just as faithfully as in the workshops. And although a picture of farming may look like a holiday, believe me, it's one of the toughest war jobs there is, calling for really hard and skillful work all the year round.
Hard it was. 48 hours per week in winter and 50 in summer. The women were employed and paid by the farmers, although at a lower rate than men who were or had been doing the same work. Minimum wage for land girls was 28 shillings per week, as against an average 38 shillings for male agricultural workers. Often the women lived in miserable conditions, in cold accommodations with no proper bathing facilities, and with insufficient food. But there were many ways in which these privations were a small price to pay for a freedom and an acceptance that had been unknown in the pre-war world.
For many women who were lesbians, the war was tremendously liberating, because in the 1930s, their lives would be very, very restricted at home, because there was the sort of idea of the dutiful daughter staying at home looking after her parents. Very, very hard for them to have any kind of expression of their sexuality. That meant that in the war, say if they went off to land girls, billeted, you know, in hostile type situations, where if you were a single woman and not had children, then you were what they called mobile, so you could be sent anywhere. Women did form liaisons, and we do have quite a lot of examples of women saying, well, you know, the war was fantastic for me, because a lot of people were so worried about the war effort, they didn't much care what we were doing anymore, so we were just left to our own devices kind of thing, and we had a great time.
Over 80,000 women from all over Britain became land girls, joining the women who served as air raid wardens, fire watchers, in the munitions factories, or in the armed services, as in the shadow of war, the role of women changed.
These girls are a great success on the land. They love their work. In fact, the only complaint from farmers is they will keep on getting married.